cannabis does affect blood flow in your body, and that can put extra pressure on your heart. But for each of these things we're talking about, the same reason people might have negative effects is the same reason why some people use those for positive effects. So that increased blood flow, that increased, stress on the body, for some people that is stressful. If you already have an underlying heart condition, then yeah, it could be stressful on your body. But a lot of people also use cannabis as like a pre-workout, right? To get things flowing and pumping better in their body.
A lot of marathon runners,
a lot of marathon runners, a lot of lifters, a lot of people who go to the gym and work out hard are using this plant as a pre-workout because it is a vasodilator and it does help blood flow move through your body better.
I'm just going to say it again. I know I said it already, but thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. I know there's so many things going on. You had a baby recently. Congratulations on that. That's so awesome.
Thank you.
How is the baby doing? Let's just go there for a second.
Oh my God, he's so awesome. I love being a mom, and he's such a happy little nugget. But it's crazy how having a kid makes you see the whole world differently. Like, people always said it, but now just seeing like families out, seeing moms, seeing like, especially like single moms, different postpartum experiences, it just puts everything into a completely different context, and you just see humans as completely different creatures.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, you get that a lot. Well, you have a kid and then you'll know.
Yeah. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm sure, whatever, it'll be different. But oh my God.
I bet. That's amazing. I know you're going to be, and already are, an amazing mother. And I know that you've been doing a lot of content around, tracking the breast milk and the THC in there and stuff, and just the journey of, whether it's time off or whatever around that. And that's a road I would love to go down with you on, but I want to go a different direction today. And so to start, I want to read a quote from your book, which is amazing. And I recommend this book so much in comments because, like, I have certain things, and I'll get to like my perspective a little bit here in a second, that I'll say, but oftentimes certain questions I'm like, listen, you need to go look into people like Dr. Riley Kirk, Dr. Benjamin Kaplan, who I learned from your podcast, Dr. Peter Grinspoon. I know you know so many more. But this quote I really love. I know this is taking up some of our time, but I think it'd be a good launching point for us. I'm going to read the whole bit here. So, the population of people who were exposed to the insane propaganda from Reefer Madness saying that cannabis makes you stupid and lazy are now the politicians running the country. And the propaganda is strong, although sometimes less obvious to this day. When communicating about cannabis with grandparents, politicians, or elders, I always start by encouraging people to start with a blank slate of knowledge on cannabis and act like you have no preconceived notion of the plant and listen to the facts in the most unbiased way possible. The bolded part, which I really love, and I know you already know, because if there was a pharmaceutical drug that could relieve pain, heighten mood, and reduce inflammation with almost no side effects like cannabis does, it would be prescribed to everyone over 40. And I like to add, probably even be on the Super Bowl commercial.
Yeah, 100%. It would be as popular as a GLP-1. I mean, if people were able to actually contextualize cannabis for what the medicine actually offers and not from what they've been taught that cannabis does to you.
Yeah. So I just didn't know if you had any other thoughts you wanted to riff on in that area just for a moment. I thought it'd be a good opening launching pad there,
Yeah, I mean, so the book's called Reefer Wellness, to use science to reverse the stigma of Reefer Madness. And you read a part there about politicians, and unfortunately, I do interact with politicians quite a bit, whether it's like in states like New Hampshire, where we only have medical, trying to get adult use, whatever it is. But those politicians are such a good example of the damage that Reefer Madness did to our society. And it is insane hearing some of the things that come out their mouth, and just the stigma is so strong when you talk to these people. I've been in front of these legislative groups, and I'll be like, I'm a daily consumer, and they'll like kind of like laugh and be like, well, why are you a daily consumer? And it's like, what do you mean? Like, why am I a daily consumer? There's so many benefits. And I remember one time I was talking about the benefit of suppositories for certain medical populations, endometriosis, painful periods, any pain below the waist, whatever it was. And like 3 of the politicians started giggling because I was talking about suppositories. And I'm like, this isn't funny. I'm not like making a joke about butts. Like this is like an actual medicine for a lot of people. And you need to take this seriously as if I was talking about a pharmaceutical drug for these same populations of people. And you would not be laughing at that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, there's so much conditioning that comes from everywhere. And I know it's like it started from Harry Anslinger, right? But then it just got infused into everything. So, if you're a teenager or when you were a teenager, if you're not, if you hear about the idea of cannabis from an elder, it's, well, Johnny's a pothead or whatever, and that's all infused from, as I understand it, the bulk of the science that's been done that a lot of the, different reports that are out there will cling to in the narrative of the news, they're using, and you may have told me this, or I may have gotten this from Ryan Sprague, that they're using like the shittiest quality, that might be in your book, they're using like the shittiest quality weed. Is that true?
Yeah, and actually when they did further analysis on the only weed that was allowed to be researched with government money, they did further analysis on it, and it resembled hemp more than it resembled type 1 cannabis. So it was more like a CBD dominant variety than a THC dominant variety, because right now we still cannot study the products that are being sold in the regulated market, which is absolutely insane that we can sell these products to the American people, but we cannot research those same products that the American people are consuming.
From federal funding and shit, right? Or like, because you and others are doing this sort of work, right?
Yeah, so with federal funding, which is the vast majority of funding that we have for science, we do operate kind of in a gray space. Like we do apply for federal grants, but we also, get funding from other sources. The issue is, couple issues. One, the cannabis industry, before it was just rescheduled to Schedule 3, was not able to like write off most things for taxes. So cannabis companies weren't doing research because it was this huge expense that they really had no like good return on, right? Mm-hmm. And the cannabis industry is struggling. There's not a ton of money for us to do the research projects that we want to do. So although we would love to have funding from just the resources we have in the industry, it's kind of impossible. You kind of need to get funding from multiple places. So we've been struggling with that. We're able to do the projects we want to do, but we're oftentimes like kind of scraping by in order to get those projects done.
Yeah, no, I get that. Well, one of the questions I was going to ask you is, and I guess I'll just skip to it because it kind of ties in. Since you are on the front lines of making change in this area, and I'm so grateful for you. You mentioned in your book, standing on the shoulders of giants. I feel in many ways that I'm standing on the shoulders of learning from people like you. Do you feel that? Do you see the needle moving with all of the work that you're doing in terms of society and politicians? I know that it's a challenging terrain to navigate, but do you feel like it's moving?
I always feel like it's moving. I'm a chronic optimist, so like might be the wrong person to ask because I'm always like, I see the change.
That's amazing.
Whenever people are like, when's it going to be rescheduled? I'm like, oh, just a couple more months. Yeah. And it finally happened. But I do see the needle moving, whether it's with politicians or even like within our industry, the want and need to understand more, to understand all the different like minor cannabinoids and terpenes and what they're doing in the body and the different ways different medical patients can utilize this plant, or even in more of like a recreational or adult use sense, like what are ways we can make our habits more sustainable and, build connection rather than, separate from each other. And this actually is tying to what you just asked before of like, why is the government putting so much resources into making us think that this plant is bad, and why have they done that for so long? It's something that I've kind of hyper fixated on for a long time.
I have a theory, but I don't want to take us too far off the base.
Oh, I want to hear yours, but I just want to like set the stage that like cannabis is this movement. It's not just a plant, it's a movement, it's a counterculture, it is community, it is shared. You can grow this medicine, you can share this medicine, you can operate outside of the system they want you to operate in and still grow and utilize a quality medicinal product. And then once you consume that, it's going to make your brain think, again, outside of the norm. You're going to start to question things. You're going to start to question the amount of control and, who's really controlling the money, who's really controlling what we do as a society. So I think that's why the government's so scared of this plant. Obviously racism like fueled Reefer Madness, right? But I think now it's like, they're trying to suppress the way that we think creatively and question things, and they want us to just follow along the same things we've been doing for 50 years. And if you know any cannabis consumers, that's not what we do. That's not what we do. We are we're very different. We think independently. We question everything, and that's really scary to governing bodies who want control. We are the opposite of that.
Yeah, amen. I'll riff on it just for a second. Alan Watts, I forget which book it was, and he may have said it a few times, but he said, and this ties in, I think, that the war on consciousness, the war on drugs was never a war on drugs. It was actually a war on consciousness, right?
100%.
And so I look at, is cannabis a gateway drug? Yes, it's actually a gateway to expanded consciousness. It's a mild psychedelic, nowhere near like the other ones that are out there, but it does have the potential to do that. Now, people who have dissonance because a lot of people that digest my content, they have dissonance around cannabis, whether it's anxiety, low motivation, etc. This is the plant bringing forth some shit for you to look at, right? And sometimes it's related to your environment too, right? All these different things, what you consume, all that stuff, right? But when you step on the other side of it, I think that you're very well versed in the political and big money interests that were there in the beginning that fueled a lot of the propaganda that came. And to be like a conspiracy theorist type dude, I wouldn't be surprised if baked into that was, oh yeah, and if people know what they're doing with this, not to sound like some fucking woo-woo whatever, but like, if there's so much negative stigma around it, it is bananas. And I see it, I know you see it in the comments too, but I see it a lot. People that are like, they are charged up about this, and they're really defending that it is really, really bad, So what do you think about those thoughts?
Yeah, so really, really bad, like the plant, like moving forward to like Schedule 3, or like bad in general?
And it's going to tie into the next question I was going to ask you, but I'm really curious, what do you think about that, the expansion of consciousness part?
Oh yeah, I completely agree, and I think even you mentioned like some people feel this creeping of anxiety, this creeping of like almost you're getting kind of strangled when you use the plant, and it's like making you anxious, and a lot of people blame the plant for that, which you'll hear me say all the time, it's never the plant's fault, right? The plant's just existing. We decide how much we want to consume, how to consume it, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So I do think it's an amazing expansion of consciousness. But as you said, some people, when their consciousness expands, that leads them to discovering some things that maybe they weren't ready to discover at that moment.
Being repressed.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with like psychedelics. Like if you have been through a traumatic experience, like that's something that you should essentially be ready for and expect to come out during that psychedelic trip. And not everyone has been through that. So some people are going to have a really, really intense experience. It might be very healing in the end, but it's going to be intense. It's going to be hard. That psychedelic is essentially like trying to come through and say, I need to come through in order for you to heal. You need to pay attention to me. Stop suppressing me. It's going to come through. Whereas some people, maybe they don't have that traumatic experience, or maybe they don't have anything that's causing them anxiety at that moment. So when their expansion of consciousness happens, it looks very different, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, we have to be realistic with ourselves of like, what we have going on and really what we think this plant can help us with, because it's not going to help us with absolutely everything in our life. It can help us to understand where we need to go with certain things, but you have to be receptive. You have to listen. And if the plant's telling you you're consuming too much, that was too high of a dose, that was too much THC, you also need to be able to listen to that and be like, okay, learning lesson. My body does not need that much THC. I'm going to tone it down, way down. And then maybe I'll have the experience that I'm looking for, a much more mild experience. But it seems like people think that they can just consume as much of the plant as they want with absolutely, no repercussions. You can take too much cannabis, and it can be uncomfortable. It won't kill you, but, it can be really intense on the mind. And if you're not ready for that, then it's a pretty intense experience.
Yeah, for some people, it can even become feeling debilitated. Like you can feel literally debilitated. Yeah.
Yes. I've had friends who've had like straight up, panic attacks from cannabis products. But then you ask them again, like, what did you consume? What dose? Where were you? Oh, I was at a party and I just like drank a tincture. You drank a tincture? Like you shouldn't be drinking tinctures. That's way too much.
I want to take a quick moment, do a little intermission to address what Riley was asking me a few moments ago. She was seeking clarity on what I meant when I said negatives, the negatives people are talking about in my comments. First, it's not all negative. Also, I am going to go into it here in the podcast here in a second, but I wanted to expound on it a little more. It's not all negatives, but the negatives that I do see are a range. There's all sorts of things. Psychosis and heart attack, stroke, low sperm count, things of that nature, CHS. It's also a lot of people talking about low motivation, lack of fulfillment, brain fog, anxiety, and things of this sort. I wanted to speak to that just for a quick little second, and we do, again, touch on it in the episode, areas of this. But if you are someone that feels that way, if you're someone that feels like you're in this cycle, this loop with cannabis, and historically there's been pressure on cannabis, take some of the insights from this podcast to first recognize that it's perfectly okay that you have it in your life. And then two, begin to make mindful shifts with how your mind and your body literally interact with the plant. If you want a good place to start to begin to see shifts in this category, you can go to my page and check out the link, and it'll take you to the 6 things that create clear-headed highs. This is based off of my experience and research, both in my life as well as getting to work with people across the globe in these areas. Doing it at your pace, but staying consistent with it, having some form of like external accountability in the process, whatever that is, and just having faith in the science and moving forward. You will see your relationship to the plant change. You'll see your relationship to yourself change, and you'll see the effects that you get from the plant in your life change as well. Things like psychosis, heart attacks, strokes, low sperm count, all these things that come up in the news and are echoes of this historical propaganda and more of the same. What do you tell people when they come to you with, claims like this, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's always thinking about a gray problem as black and white. And that's always why we get into these situations, right? So, you talk about heart problems, yes, cannabis does affect blood flow in your body, and that can put extra pressure on your heart. But for each of these things we're talking about, the same reason people might have negative effects is the same reason why some people use those for positive effects. So that increased blood flow, that increased, stress on the body, for some people that is stressful. If you already have an underlying heart condition, then yeah, it could be stressful on your body. But a lot of people also use cannabis as like a pre-workout, right? To get things flowing and pumping better in their body.
A lot of marathon runners,
a lot of marathon runners, a lot of lifters, a lot of people who go to the gym and work out hard are using this plant as a pre-workout because it is a vasodilator and it does help blood flow move through your body better. So, there's those people who use that for one reason, and then there's the people who, it might have negative effects on their heart if they're already, have a sensitive heart. And we can't, again, blame the plant. You just need to understand as a person, like, if you already have that issue, then you're probably not within that population that should be using the plant. And this is the same for every single medicine that has ever existed on planet Earth, ever. It's never going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's never going to be this is right for 100% of people on planet Earth. Cannabis is safer than pretty much any pharmaceutical. It's safe for a large amount of people, but it is not going to be safe for 100% of people at any dose at any consumption method. And we need to stop putting cannabis under this microscope that no other medicines are under. There are adverse effects you see from pharmaceutical medicines all the time. People literally die from them. And nobody's died from cannabis before because it is really safe. But again, it works the way cannabis works in the body through your endogenous cannabinoid system. It is interacting with every other system in the body. So really it depends on your underlying health and your dose of the product that you're using and what your outcomes are going to be. But for most people, it is a pretty safe medicine. And even things like sperm health, like, yes, cannabis does affect your sperm health. It can decrease the motility of sperm as well as the amount of sperm. But there's also people who are only going to have sex if they're using cannabis because it helps them increase their libido. It helps them get into the mood. It helps them, feel more like themselves and feel connected to their partner. So is a little bit of sex with a lower sperm count better than no sex with a higher sperm count? Probably,
In there also like so many other factors too, right? Because like where did this study come from? Who ran the study? And what are the other parameters or whatever of the people that they're testing, like I'm straight up, like how motivated are they? Are they not motivated people? Because that fucks with a lot of shit. If you're not fulfilled, if you're not happy, it's going to change a lot of shit in your body in a lot of negative ways.
So true. And you bring up a part of cannabis medicine that I think we never study. And that's the human brain aspect of it. We're always like looking on a microscopic scale, like, okay, this receptor and this cannabinoid causes blah, 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 blah. But we're not, and then the community will always say, well, everyone's going to react to these products differently because we all have different lived experience. We all have different brains. And that's the part we're missing out of these like predicted algorithms saying, okay, this cultivar or strain is going to make you feel this way. Mm-hmm. Well, can we group the human brains to say, okay, there's anxious brains, there's autistic brains, there's ADHD brains, there's these different types of brains that exist. And if we can start to understand the grouping of how certain brains react to certain products, I think that's going to result in better predictable outcomes for the individual person. And this is also like what we're researching. We're trying to solve this problem. So I'll put that out there too.
Dude, I had a thought of this and I'll just go ahead and say it right now. I would be honored and I think it would be super cool if somehow you and I could partner up on some kind of like a case study in this way. And because, I can help with, finding people that are like, in different stages, whether they're my clients or they're in my community or whatever it is. And then you can kind of run the back end stuff and we can kind of, I don't know how it would look, but
no, this would be really cool. And yeah, so let me just give a little more background because this would be an awesome partnership, but we're essentially creating like a new website, a new like platform where people can answer questions about them as a person and their brain type, and then start logging the different products that they're using and the effects and outcomes that they get.
Beautiful.
So I think we could absolutely run like a specific cohort study. Maybe we just start with like anxious individuals. And then move forward from there and just see what the results are after, we have the anxiety kind of database.
Yeah, dude, that's amazing to hear. Yeah, I would just be curious, like if they were to go through like a questionnaire and, the question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how fulfilled would you describe your relationships? On a scale of 1 to 5, how fulfilled are you in your work? On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you get time in nature? On a scale of 1 to 5, how often are you scrolling on your phone? And like certain shit like that, and look at those metrics along, I would be super curious.
That is such a good idea. And so many of those are usually connected too. Like if you hate your job and you're working way too much, you probably don't spend as much time in nature. You probably don't have that freedom to go out and go for a walk and enjoy that. So yeah, I'm sure we'd see some pretty dramatic results. So yeah. I love that. And I'm actually talking to my data team like later this week. So I'm going to bring that up with them.
Okay. Beautiful. Amazing. I would just, however I can help, but I would be really curious to see what came from that.
Yeah, me too.
So let's double back on, because there's another thing, a reel that I saw from you recently, and it was something that I wanted to talk to you about, so it was timely. And, it's basically the difference between smoking and, say, dry herb vaping. But also, I think we talked last time about the difference between smoking cannabis and smoking, like, cigarettes or other whatever. And I think you said that there wasn't enough science out there to really show long term. And maybe I'm wrong, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so enough science to show the negative effects of long-term smoking.
Cannabis.
Yeah, so there isn't. There's really no long-term studies that say like this is detrimental to your lung health. With that being said, I don't think anybody out there is really fooling themselves into thinking that inhaling that much smoke all day, every day has no harmful effects on our lungs. Our lungs are some of the most delicate tissues in our body. And of course, like smoke is inflammatory in its nature. There's a lot of different things happening in smoke. It's not good, right? It's not going to be maybe it doesn't kill you, but it's probably not good for your lungs in general. And I do think most smokers understand that, and maybe in their head they're just weighing the pros and cons and saying, okay, the benefits I get from smoking cannabis outweigh the negative effects from smoking cannabis, right? And
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think there are tons of benefits to smoking cannabis. I think it's a very unique consumption method that is like nothing else, because
Right.
that heat changes the chemistry and it makes it a completely different experience than something like dry herb vaping. And this is something I talk about in my book, all like a whole chapter on like consumption methods, because I think it's a part of the cannabis experience that people don't pay enough attention to, is that every different consumption method is a different tool. It's going to introduce different chemistry into our body, and it's going to result in us feeling different. Like every consumption method makes us feel differently. So I actually have a dry herb vape here. This is like part of a dry herb vape.
Nice.
But this is one of my favorite consumption methods, because you're still able to use the flower. I think there's something very spiritual and medicinal to using cannabis flower. You're not going to hear me talking about like vape carts being like, this is the experience you're after. I'm like a vape cart hater, and I'm very open about that. But yeah, so any consumption method I can use flower, that's something that I'm going to gravitate towards. And what dry herb vaping is compared to smoking is you're not introducing all of the combustion byproducts to your body. You're really just selectively vaporizing the compounds that you want out of the plant. So the cannabinoids and terpenes. And it's going to leave behind all the rest of that organic material that you just don't need to be combusting. You don't need to be inhaling. There's really nothing medicinal in it. It's just kind of junk that's going into your lungs. So I love dry herb vaping because you're introducing heat, you're vaporizing those compounds, and you're still using flower. You still get that beautiful like terpene flavor come through. I think it actually comes through stronger with dry herb vapes. And it's instant, right? Like inhaling, I think that's something really beautiful about smoking too, is like you take that long first deep breath and you exhale and you automatically feel better like right off the start. Obviously that's helpful for just like feedback and being like, oh, I'm really stressed out, I need to go like just take a hit. But it's also just, you know, it's a spiritual experience to be able to do that with those like meditative big breaths. And
Yeah.
you still get the same thing with dry herb vaping. But, you know, some people are like, dry herb vaping doesn't give me the same feeling as smoking. And that's okay. Like certain people are just going to gravitate towards certain consumption methods. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to utilize kind of all of them because, you know, I have these resources. But I definitely would like encourage people to try out different consumption methods with different products, because you might find one that you didn't even know exists that reacts really well with your body, has no like, you know, maybe you're getting a little phlegmy from like smoking so much, and maybe you just need to take like not a tolerance break, but like a smoke break. You just need to take a break from inhaling smoke for a little bit and have a backup method of consumption. So if you don't want to take a full tolerance break, you can still just change your consumption method and have, you know, a break from the amount of smoke entering your lungs.
God, there's so many questions. How often do you take a tolerance break?
I never take tolerance breaks, except when I was pregnant, and that was the longest tolerance break I've ever taken.
And that was a full, because I think I've heard you before, and it's how I see it. I believe I see it this way because of talking to you, that a tolerance break doesn't necessarily have to mean full stop. You can lower the amount.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely advocate for that for specifically medical patients. Like, you know, people make you think that you need to take a tolerance break because we're trained to think that being dependent on cannabis is bad, but people don't take tolerance breaks from their other medicines. You're not taking a Lexapro tolerance break, right? Like, it's okay to be dependent on that medicine if it's helping your mental health, your spiritual health, your life as a whole.
People are dependent on so many fucking things.
So, like, I don't take caffeine tolerance breaks either because I love caffeine. It's like part of my daily routine, and I genuinely don't think I have an issue with it. And same thing with cannabis. I'm not someone who consumes really high doses of cannabis. I consume low doses more regularly than a high dose less regularly, if that makes sense.
Dude, this makes me think of something else that was not in my notes, but that's great. And I'm giving my thoughts on this. The idea of cannabis use disorder. As I understand cannabis use disorder, it's kind of similar to addiction in that the idea is that you're using it, you're continuing to use it despite negative effects. And so then it's just a matter of perspective and how you quantify what negative effects are.
Spot on. And that's part of the problem because it kind of depends on what practitioner you're talking to and what they think of as those negative effects. And for cannabis use disorder, I think there's 12 different bullet points. And if you qualify for 2 of the 12, then you have cannabis use disorder. And one of them is building a tolerance. Like if you've built a tolerance, then you are, you have one of those boxes checked. And another one is if you spend time acquiring and consuming said plant, drug, whatever it is. So if you spend time rolling up and smoking and you build a tolerance, you have cannabis use disorder. So I have cannabis use disorder, and probably a lot of people listening to this episode do. So I think we do need a more realistic scope of cannabis use disorder, because I would actually agree that some people do have a form of cannabis use disorder.
What you could call that, right? But the parameters that they're putting in, they're silly.
Right. So why don't we work on that and create a more rigorous, based on research and based on case studies and people who actually struggled with regulating their consumption of this plant? And why don't we make that a little more serious so that our whole community takes it more seriously? Because right now it's like a joke. Cannabis use disorder is not something that people take seriously because some psychologist in a room just created some bullet points and then published it. It's not something that's really based on any sort of lived experience or any sort of, real research. So why are we expected to treat that seriously?
Yeah, I'll often say, unless you're going to go, sit in one of those tanks where, there's no motion, you don't feel any motion, and the lights are completely out.
I want to go in one so bad.
The lights are completely out, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing. So you could even say, going for a walk in nature, even though there is a multitude of benefits. In a form is a way of distracting. It's a way of detaching from, just being a being, if you will, right? And so when you look at it through that lens, so many people are doing all sorts of stuff. I mean, even working out can be to an extreme that one could say it's not healthy. Fuck, man. So.
No, 100%. And again, I think it's kind of based on stigma and based on, again, this Reefer Madness thought. And I'm hoping that as more professionals, MDs, PhDs, whoever they are, who actually publish these papers and make these rules, I'm hoping as more of them become educated on the endogenous cannabinoid system, the ECS, as more people actually talk to cannabis consumers, and as more people actually consume the plant and have their own lived experience, that they will start to help us rewrite these papers and rewrite history so that we can, treat this plant truly like a medicine and not as a narcotic, which is currently how it's being treated.
Yeah, right. And I mean, if it was so much of what we were trained to fear, being lazy and not amounting to anything, that was the main narrative, you're pretty good living proof that that's not the case.
And honestly,
there's countless others too, right? I'm not to cut you off, but I can't even imagine how many people you've met and know in your life that are impactful, successful, not from the metrics of look at all this money, but impactfully, successful people of all walks of life, and they have a relationship with cannabis.
And that's the thing is there's so many people who are daily cannabis consumers that are not open about it. They're not out of the green closet, right? Because that stigma is still there. But as you exist in your I'm a very open cannabis consumer, obviously. It's like my whole platform. But, as you get into these groups of like really, really well off people, really successful business owners, lawyers, doctors, like these people in society that you don't typically think of cannabis consumers, they're oftentimes daily cannabis consumers. You just would never know because guess what? We don't look differently. We are just here in society, operating, and we are successful. We are creative. We have great home and family lives. We have great balance. We are, we're just living our lives, but we don't have to put a badge on us that says I consume cannabis and I'm still successful. And I honestly think the cannabis industry is a really good example of that because they're probably the hardest working people I've ever met in my entire life are business owners in the cannabis industry, and pretty much everyone is a daily consumer. And I am always mind blown of how hardworking everyone in this industry is and how much love they have for the plant.
Yeah, dude, this is in alignment with like whenever I speak to someone who is like, I feel like I'm doing it too much. My life is like good and I'm successful and all that stuff, but I feel like I'm doing it too much. I'm always curious to dive into like, where are these feelings coming from? What kind of narratives are you absorbing? Because if you really are like, and for the longest time, I've always said, like, dude, are you fucking happy? Like, are you truly happy? That's what matters.
And
if you have consistent, like, there's a difference between someone who smokes as soon as they wake up throughout the entire day and they are getting by and they are not fulfilled and they are not happy, and someone who maybe has a few drags throughout the day, but they're working on projects that fulfill them and they're motivated, they're around community that supports them, they're clearly learning and growing, And
we kind of have a happiness epidemic happening right now where like people aren't happy. And I think unfortunately social media is a really good mirror of this, where you look into the comments and stuff and you're like, man, you guys kind of look miserable sometimes. It's like, and to your point of like the big question that we should always be seeking is like, are you fulfilled? Are you happy? Like these are the questions that make living life worth it, that make us wake up every day with a smile or with a frown, right? And these are not the questions that are asked in most research studies of like, okay, well, was the participant happy?
Yeah. What are their relationships like? Because it fucking matters.
All these things you said. Are you going outside? Have you ever grown a plant? Do you have a good relationship with your family? All of these things. They're not what we're asking in research studies, but they are the most important outcomes for the human experience. And cannabis is one of the few things that can help us come together as a community and can genuinely make us happier, especially if we're doing other things in our life to help supplement that and to help, further bring it up, not just fully relying on cannabis to, completely change our lives around, but like using it as a tool to say, okay, I'm going to use cannabis in order to go for a walk and brainstorm about this project that I'm doing that I'm really stuck on and I can't figure out, what I need to do next. I'm going to use cannabis as a mental tool to expand my consciousness and to think outside the box. And guess what? You're probably going to come out with an idea from that walk, because between walking and exercise, getting outside and using the plant, that is like the best expansion of consciousness that you can have.
Yeah, and as the only thing I'll add there is, as Jim Rohn says, stand guard at the door of your mind. What kind of conversations you're in and what kind of content you're digesting.
And the people you're around too, like, who you decide to spend your time with. There are some people, they might, hide themselves well, but they might be draining the life out of you and, not allowing you to reach your full potential. So you kind of do need to like audit the different things in your life, not just cannabis. Everyone wants you to audit cannabis, but audit your cannabis use, but also audit the people around you, audit your environment inside your home, audit your job and how much you're working and who you're spending all your time for. Like, is that worth it? Is that worth what's happening in your life?
Dude. This is such an epic conversation, and you are the scientist. But I'm going to just paraphrase a little bit of what I think I know and what I understand, what makes sense to me, and then get your thoughts on it. So as I understand it, when you are in close quarters with someone, there's literally science that shows a transfer of energy. And I know that there's terms that label what's actually happening, but that's why if you go into a room where there was just an argument a lot of people can fucking feel that was happening there. And it's something that you can't escape. And it's in the idea of you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? I say that, like, if you have cannabis in your life, this is even more important, right? Like, it's important for fucking anybody, but if you have cannabis in your life, I think it's super, super important. And if you don't think it is, at some point it's going to be, right? And so what I'll go to is when you recognize that it's a psychoactive and it's a psychotropic plant and it's a mildly psychedelic plant, it helps you see that a little bit more clearly. But could you speak to that? Could you speak to the idea of the psychoactive, psychotropic, mildly psychedelic nature and how you feel about that idea?
100%. And I want to spend time talking about energy because it's something, again, this is not published on. Like, you can't look up, how does cannabis make you view energy movement in the world? But I have spent so much time thinking about this. And I think part of that is, one, consuming cannabis outside. It's kind of similar to consuming psychedelics outside, where you like see the energy of nature differently. Like, you see energy systems differently. You see water flowing a little bit differently. You know, your brain is like spending more time thinking about that. But not just that, like, I oftentimes will consume and either spend time with my friends, my husband, or my animals, and touch is different. You can, like, when you touch another living being, you can feel your energy like transferring and connected, which you don't feel when you're not consuming the plant. And it's so hard to put into words because you literally just feel that connection. And that's why I talk so much about, like, how cannabis can help us build community and build connection, because I do think that energy, maybe it's just making our brain a little more aware of the energy that's already existing around us. But it certainly is a noticeable effect that I wish we had more research to explain, because right now it's just like, you know, us cannabis consumers talking about it and everyone notices it. But, you know, what is that spiritual change? What is that? It's almost like when you consume psychedelics and you see everything kind of moving around you and you're like, is this always happening? And my brain is just now allowing me to see it? Or is this something that is a product of the psychedelic that is not always happening in my brain? And that's kind of the way I think about cannabis too, is like, is this connection always this strong and I'm just more aware of it? Or is cannabis helping me like foster this connection and this feeling with other living beings and living things?
Aren't there some like early signs that it can kind of act as kind of like a neural lubricant?
Yes, kind of similar to psychedelics, like helping like the dendrites of your brain cells like reach further and form new connections, which is also part of like healing from trauma, right?
Creating a new identity. Like, I think it's a fucking tool. Just not to cut you off, but the spiritual side of things, the way I think about it is, it's always either a spiritual ally or a spiritual teacher, right?
Yeah.
When it's from my perspective, when it's teaching you, that's when you get the resistance. Whether it's like you're upset about something, you got some anxiety, whatever the fuck it is, like, hey, it's showing you some shit. But if you're in a good space, right, and like, because I think, which to your point, a lot of people, they may not be able to feel that energetic thing yet because they are constricted in all these ways, potentially. I know I used to be, right? But the more that you use it as an ally, in the sense where I'm going to train a new identity. I'm gonna separate myself from the shit that drains me scientifically. And, and I'm going to focus on bringing in stuff that's good for that, because I know it's good for me, just period. But also, given the psychoactive nature of the plant, all this stuff, you know. So that's what I'm kind of curious about, is like, because I think that's kind of what it's always been looked at by the spiritual, you know, people of old, right? Is like this idea, right, at its root. And so the psychoactive nature of the plant, I just didn't know if you had any, like, going in that and connecting those dots a little bit, you know.
I mean, not really. I don't think most people study cannabis as like a mild psychedelic, but to your point, it is. And I think as consumers, we know like the same things matter, like set and setting. Like, we always think about this with psychedelics. We always think about it. You wouldn't well, most people wouldn't, most people wouldn't like drop acid in a dark room watching Family Guy, right? Because the set and setting sucks. Like nobody wants to do that. But people will smoke weed in a dark room watching Family Guy and expect to have the same experience as if you were outside in nature during the day, golden hour, whatever it is, you know, smoking that same plant. Set and setting matter just as much with cannabis as it does with more intense psychedelics. But because it's less intense and because it's more normalized, we don't put so much intention into our process with cannabis. And I do think that's part of like why some people aren't getting what they hope they want out of the plant, because again, they're putting it all on the plant and none on them. Like you also need to like foster that relationship with the plant and say, okay, I want to heal, I want to learn from you, the plant, so I'm going to do what I can as the human and, you know, put myself in the right mind space, get a good drink, go outside, whatever it is, not be on my phone, then consume the plant. And that's going to be a really different experience compared to, you know, if you are in a dark room that, you know, you have your TV on like really loud, you're not allowing any space for your brain to think on its own. You're kind of just like, you're kind of just overstimulating yourself in order to have maybe that like escapism experience that you might subconsciously be after with cannabis of like, I just want to forget about it and move on. And then cannabis like, you know, comes really intensely into your brain and says, yo, you can't forget about me. Like I'm trying to show you something, you need to listen. So yeah, I mean, you talk about intention a lot, and I think it is like the hidden tool of being a sustainable cannabis consumer is just making sure that your intention is always there, especially if you're consuming high dose THC products.
Yeah, dude. Okay, so let's go there just real quick on the psychosis, and I don't know if this contributes to CHS or not, but I think with psychosis, some of the factors that can be in that is super high THC and high concentrate stuff. So like when I talk to people, again, I'll refer, hey, go read Reefer Wellness, right? But I'll say, you know, for me, I try to be mindful in my sourcing, which for me, I get Florida Medical. I'd love your opinion on Florida Medical. And then I keep it below 20%, and I stay away from, to your point, the high vape stuff. I don't do any vape stuff. In fact, when I have in the past, I feel like it's something's not right about it, right? But also the dab stuff, right? The people that are just fucking, that's someone who, hey man, maybe in the future, you know, that I don't know, might want to lower that. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I love the flower. I love cannabis flower because it produces what I call the natural ratio of all the different medicinal aspects of the plant, right? So the plant can only produce so much THC. The plant can only produce so many terpenes, whatever it is. And I think that is kind of a form of harm reduction, is actually consuming flower versus some of these other products. So that's one. I think consuming 20% or lower is a great place to be in. And unfortunately, sometimes that's kind of hard to find in this current regulated market because it is very THC dominated, where people are always after more THC. And I do have some here. I always suggest people buy like CBD flower if you can't find lower dose THC flower, and just mix in some CBD flower with your THC flower and essentially like cut it to the degree that you want, dilute out the THC so you have a more balanced experience, so you can consume a 1-to-1, you know, CBD to THC and not just blast your brain with THC. With that being said, some people still have very like great experiences with really high dose THC, and that's fine. But I do think the vape carts that are like 95, 99% THC, I think this is where we're kind of borderlining like, I don't want to say it's no longer a medicine, because it definitely is for some people. But it's borderline a higher risk situation for that person to be consuming that much THC. And it's also borderlining more of a pharmaceutical experience, because you're taking away the magic of plant medicine, which is all of these beautiful compounds working in synergy in the body. If you're consuming a 99% THC vape cart, you've taken away that synergy. You've taken away that beauty of plant medicine. And now you're essentially consuming a vapable pharmaceutical THC product, you know, and a lot of people, myself included, will describe that like vape experience as very hollow. It's very
Yeah.
short-lived. It's very hollow. It's like it's almost like you have these blinders on, and it just feels different.
Yeah, like
And
I used to get brain fog from weed, period, but I don't anymore. But the time that I would fart around with a vape for a couple days, the next day I did get brain fog.
I did too. Yeah, and it's just a different feeling. Whereas like cannabis flower gives this like beautiful, expansive, spiritual feeling, and the vape carts just like hone like this really narrow, like kind of weird feeling. So I always recommend people use flower. I'm also just like a grower and a proponent of flower in general. And actually, I have a bit of a different perspective on dabs than you do. I actually think I actually do enjoy dabs, and that's because a lot of like high quality dab products like live resin, live rosin, these types of products, they still do represent the natural ratio. They are oftentimes either solventless, or if they do use solvents, you know, all of the solvents are removed. But unlike vape carts, you don't need to add extra shit in order to vaporize it. You can have a thick resinous product that then you can, you know, put into your dab rig. And for a lot of medical consumers, like specifically like chronic pain patients, they need pretty high doses of active compounds. And if you think of like, again, harm reduction, okay, maybe you need to consume 10 joints a day. Would the equivalent be 3 dabs to that amount of THC? And then you have so much less material entering your lungs. You still get like the medicinal products you're looking for. But again, you're not burning all of these non-medicinal products and putting all of that smoke into your body. So I think dabs are a great product if you know how to use them and if you approach it, again, with intention, because there are some dab products that are just like the vape carts that are 99% THC or just like not a high quality, like plant focused product. So I think that's kind of where the gray area is there. But I am actually kind of a fan of dabs as a consumption method in general.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would trust your judgment on it. I just, in my mind, it seems like it's a super concentrated way of doing it. And I guess it would depend on the amount, right? So someone who's dabbing all fucking day, right? That may not be so good. But what about the butane part, right? Don't you have to use butane to do it? And then are you like sucking in the butane then, or what? 'Cause I don't
So
do
you're not actually. You're going to be sucking in more butane if you're smoking a joint, and if you light the end and then you suck in like when you're lighting it, you're going to be sucking in more butane than you do with dabs, because the butane, the torch, is just heating up the rig. So dabbing is a form of vaporization. It's a type of vaping. So you're essentially taking your rig and you're heating up the portion that you're going to put your dab on with your butane torch. So you're like, you're blowing that. You hold that for like, say it's like 8 seconds, whatever it is. Then you typically use like a temperature gun, or if you've been dabbing for a while, you don't have to. You measure the temperature of where that temperature is at that you just heated. When it's in the range that you're looking for, you introduce your concentrate and then you inhale. So you're not actually like, you're not beelining the butane to your body. You're just using the butane to heat up the rig that you're going to introduce the concentrate to.
Okay. I'm going to have to look more into that. That changes my perspective on that. But the high THC thing is still, either way, whether it's dab or it's smoked flower, it's something to be mindful of.
100%. And unfortunately, it's kind of a product of our industry. And I think it's somewhere we've done a great disservice to the patients and the plants when we are offering really only high THC products. And I get it. I get supply and demand, and people have lived in a scarcity complex for so long with cannabis because it has been taken away from us. We didn't have a legal avenue to get cannabis for a really long time. So people are still going into a dispensary and saying, all right, I got $40. Give me the highest THC thing for the lowest price, and that's what I'm going to buy, right? Because it is also still expensive in a lot of states, especially with taxes. So unfortunately, that's what most consumers are going in asking for, and that's driving the market so that a lot of dispensaries won't even carry products that are less than 25, 30% THC. So, how are consumers even supposed to find products and, reliably find products that are lower dose when this is what our system's set up as? I hope that in a more medical focused landscape that there's going to be kind of like, I don't want to say rules in place because we don't need more rules, but some sort of incentive for dispensaries to carry lower dose products, CBD products, CBG products, just more of like what the plant has to offer and less of this like super dry, crusty 35% THC flower.
Yeah. Heard. Yeah. Cool, man. All right. Well, that helps me iron out the thoughts on that a little bit. Again, there's so many places that I would love to dive in deeper with you today.
Well, one more thing, sorry about psychosis, because I never actually answered about psychosis.
Okay, yeah.
It's the same thing like the other things we're talking about with like if you have a genetic predisposition of schizophrenia and other like mental health conditions, you are in a higher risk category for any sort of psychotropic medicine at all, right?
Yeah.
Including cannabis. So that's something that you as an individual need to be more aware of. But like cannabis isn't going to give you schizophrenia. It's not like you're not going to catch it like the common cold. And especially like if you do have some sort of balanced formula, like it's relatively low risk to experience this, especially if you're over the age of 18 and using in a relatively responsible way. Okay.
And I don't know, thank you for that. I don't know if this is true or not, but I think I saw somewhere, maybe it was the Peter Grinspoon book, about where like when you look at the years of like where weed has become way more legal, and then you look at the actual percentage of people who have psychosis and schizophrenia, that percentage has not gone up.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not like access to weed is exponentially making more mental health issues, especially like, psychosis type issues. These people have always existed. They're just a part of our population. And weed also exists too. It's just something that we need to take into account when we think about personalized medicine. And again, for those people on any sort of medicine, there's also really interesting research that people with schizophrenia have changes in their ECS, and that the ECS may be involved in the pathogenesis of schizophrenia in general, like different levels of signaling, different, genetic markers, whatever it is. Patients with schizophrenia tend to have different levels in their ECS.
Yeah. So it's like everything is like, it's deeper than what you see in the news, right? And I think one cardinal rule is like if you see a news article that if you step back and you look at the title and you say, did the person who created this title have a desire to instill fear in some way? Because if so, you might want to like double check the sources and learn from some more grounded sources from my perspective.
Yeah. The New York Post is the most egregious headlines I've ever seen in my life. Like, I didn't know how like predatory they were until I started just over the past like year reading some of their posts. I'm like, this should be illegal. Like they are literally twisting the words of every single thing that's happening in society in order to get more clicks. Like that is what's wrong with the media. This is like really messed up that reaches millions of people.
Yeah. So I would like to ask one more question and then hopefully have just a couple minutes with you after we stop the podcast here. But just because a lot of the people that I would love to help, and I feel like I'm already doing a good job in many ways, not to toot my own horn, but simultaneously to toot my own horn, because that's okay to toot your horn.
Why not?
But like the people who are those that like, nothing seems to be out of whack necessarily in their life. They're generally happy. They like their job. They're healthy. They're, they have good relationships and everything. And they like cannabis, but there's just a part of them that is like, well, I don't know. I shouldn't be leaning on this. And I know we talked about it earlier, but I want to specifically hone in on those that are smoking joints. And let's say they're smoking, 2 joints a day. Maybe they're spreading it out, 2.5, 3 joints a day, give or take. Maybe let's say 1 gram to 2 grams a day in smoked flower, yada, yada, right? To them, there's really nothing to feel bad about this leaning on, I think.
I would completely agree. And to me, that's like the equivalent of taking any sort of medicine. Like you're essentially just consuming enough to like alleviate your brain, allow your brain to like kind of relax, think in a different way, and, lean on the medicine a little bit. And I think that's absolutely fine. And, unless you are experiencing some sort of negative effect, I don't think that cannabis use is a problem.
Yeah,
It's a different.
aside from just like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this as much.
Well, right. And that's unfortunately based on like stigma in society and people saying like, okay, well, you can consume, but only on weekends and only at nighttime, right? And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
well, no, like I can consume in the morning and still have a very productive day. I still go for a run. I still do my job. I still feed my animals. I still, take care of my kids, whatever it is. If you're checking all those boxes and you're still consuming cannabis, like it's really, I think you might just feel the pressures and guilt from society a little stronger than other people do. And that also might be laced into like what your parents told you about cannabis, what your grandparents told you about cannabis. And that's just kind of coming through with you more than others because maybe you've been exposed to that type of propaganda more than others have. And that's completely reasonable. I think that would be expected. But also on that same note, and I'm sure you see this all the time, is people around 35 years old oftentimes will be like, I've consumed cannabis my whole life, but all of a sudden I consume it and it's giving me anxiety. It's making me like shut down. I don't feel good. I feel like you get all these adverse effects all of a sudden at like 35 when you've never experienced it before. And obviously we don't know exactly why this is happening, but I think it's changes in your body and your body's, ECS is maturing and changing, and maybe it literally doesn't need the plant as much as it used to. So maybe it's your body saying, hey, you don't need to consume as much cannabis anymore. Maybe switch to more like CBD forward products and use really like microdoses of THC, and you still might get the benefits you need from the plant, but you might need to reevaluate like the doses, the consumption method, how often you're using the plant. And if your body's constantly telling you like, we have anxiety, we're not having fun, stop doing this, you gotta just stop and say, okay, what is my body trying to tell me and how can I make this better?
Dude, what a wonderful place to wrap up on. Dude, I'm so glad that you asked this question because when I talk to people about this, because I do see that a lot, I feel like I've been paraphrasing something that came from you, but it may not have, right? And so let me know your thoughts, because you just said you're still looking into it. I thought that because what I see is in the background, there's unconscious stress in most cases in these people's lives that they've not looked at. And over that, however many decades, the endocannabinoid system lessens its natural ability to regulate stress because you've been leaning everything on the plant and not having any other forms of natural somatic bridges like the things we were talking about earlier. So what do you think about that?
I think that makes a ton of sense, especially like if your anxiety is like a new type of anxiety, like not like maybe you've had anxiety in the past through like your job or certain aspects of your home life. Did I get all my plants in the ground, whatever it is. But now maybe like you have a kid or you have a new dog or something changed in your life. Then maybe like your body just is like been trying to regulate one way for a really long time, but now you have something new come up that you need to find a new plan. You need to think a little outside the box. You can't use the same exact tool that you've been using for the past 20 years. You're going to have to think a little bit deeper. You're going to need to consider any bioactive molecule going in your body. Are you drinking way too much caffeine? My husband drinks way too much caffeine. And when he's like, I'm anxious, I'm like, of course you're anxious. You just consumed a pot of coffee. And same thing with, these people. It's like, what has changed? You have something new on your plate. When you're 35, like your body is operating differently than when you were 18 years old. And we need to expect that, our bodies, especially when we're 18 and our body's going through so much and so much change, activating the ECS can help maintain that balance and that change. But when you're 35, your body's not going through as much change. So maybe we don't need as much like overarching regulation from hammering our ECS every single day. Maybe we do need to be more of a moderate consumer or just a lower dose consumer.
I'm with that completely. I love this. This has been an amazing conversation. The only thing I would add into that is like, also reflect, because we were saying earlier, also reflect on what other things are going on, because I think oftentimes it is a repression, and sometimes it could be someone who's been in a particular field of work for however long, and they grew up, this is my job, and they're really, really motivated, but at some point, something within them is like, nah, man, I'm fucking done with this shit. Like, I don't want to do this shit anymore, and it's coming out as anxiety, right?
Yeah.
To your point, like, there could be something simple. There could be something simple where it's like, hey, I'm just at this age, and but it's worth at least reflecting on that.
100%. Yeah. And it can even be things like a little less obvious. Like maybe your friend just got like a promotion and a dream job that like now it's making you reflect more on your job and what you're doing with your life. And you're like, oh my God, everyone else is doing all these amazing things. And now like, I'm just sinking in my career.
Yeah.
And those subconscious things, they get to you over time. Even if you're not putting a bunch of mental stress on it at that moment, it's still affecting you mentally. And when you do consume cannabis or a psychedelic, all those subconscious things are going to start floating to the top, and you're going to be like, oh my God, what is happening right now? But you've known it's happening. You just hasn't been like super aware of exactly what was happening.
Dude, so amazing. I'm hoping that I still get maybe 5 minutes with you after we wrap up here.
Absolutely, for sure.
So obviously the book, is there a place that you recommend people get the book, or?
It doesn't really matter to me. I do sell signed copies through reeferwellnessbook.com, but you can also go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, like Target, all of these other avenues and purchase whatever makes most sense for you or whatever's on sale. No judgment there.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then you said earlier we might be able to do a part 2 in the next month or something at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sweet. I'm looking forward
to it.
Thank you so much for hanging out today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Y'all have a good day. I hope y'all had fun hanging out with me and Riley. See you later. Bye-bye.
Mad love. Peace.